Now recording. So, good afternoon, everybody. Or good just afternoon, I suppose. Where are the rest of you? Rather early in the semester to be slacking off, don't you think? Well, at any rate. So, today we are going to be discussing cascading style sheets. We are, to some extent, we've now moved on from HTML. We are going to talk about CSS. Obviously, HTML will still come up from time to time as we expand our knowledge of web programming, but we now must move swiftly on to basically the difference between the internet of the modern day and the internet of, I almost want to say your parents' generation. Is the internet old enough now to be able to say that? Possibly. Anyway, this is the big difference between internet these days and internet in the 90s. So, cascading style sheets. Anyway, so what is CSS and what role does it play on a website? Well, as I've said, it stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS focuses on the presentation of the data in the website. HTML primarily focuses on the content of the web page. CSS, content and organization. CSS focuses on style, look, layout, like user interface, how the website feels, that sort of thing. So the reason that we do this, as software engineers, we must understand, it's a very important principle, that if you don't separate your concerns, very soon your designs become larger and larger and larger and larger and larger and larger and larger, and they eventually crush you. If we separate concerns, that means that we have two smaller snowballs to lift around rather than one big one that we can't even lift around, right? It's all a matter of managing how much mental work it is to work on these designs. The less separated into parts something is, the more mental work it is to work with. So, we separate content from how it looks, HTML versus CSS. It is also, it allows us to present the same markup page but with different styles for different situations. This is also a very important principle. So, it creates a division between the content of the web page and how it is presented. Good morning. Therefore, we can have the web page look different in different situations. A classical example of this would be websites with a dark mode, right? The dark mode version of the website and the light mode version of the website, those are two different styles applied to the same content. Two different CSS files applied to the same HTML file. So, and in the same way that separating the CSS from the HTML allows us to apply different CSS to the same HTML, they also allow us to apply different HTML to the same CSS. So, if you're working with a website and you want consistent styling across multiple HTML pages, you can pull that styling out into its own file and apply it to all of those different web pages. Does that make sense? Good. Wonderful. So what is CSS? How is it constructed? CSS is a set of styling rules. Each rule has one or more selectors. These selectors determine what elements of the page this CSS rule applies to. There is also a declaration block containing one or more declarations. So, selectors specify to which elements the declarations in the declaration block will apply. And can anybody guess what this piece of CSS would do? Without reading that second bullet. Yes?
Text color would become red and the background color would become blue.
Yes. To what? What does this apply to?
Header?
Header size 2. Only header size 2, not all headers. Right? So, very good. Any questions about that? CSS does not depart greatly from this basic anatomy. As discussed previously, HTML tags can have ID and class attributes. We can use ID and class attributes to target CSS rules. So, for example, if I want some particular styling to apply to just one element, I can target that just one element by its ID. When specifying an ID in a selector, you always use the hashtag ## symbol / octacore, whatever you want to call that thing. $ID. In the case of classes, we use the period. The period designates to the selector that we are now talking about a class. Shall we do some examples? If everybody could please load up your favorite code editor. Or perhaps the one that you are, if not your favorite, then at least please load a functional one. So, is this a good level of magnification? So, let's make CSS example 1.html. I'm going to make a simple web page with a few elements. Please follow along, although of course please modify your web page in whatever you manner you see fit. This also functions as a bit of HTML review from last time. CSS examples 1. H2, these are some CSS examples. H2. Good morning. There. So, quick review. What's a div?
Division of sections.
A division of sections. A good way to think of a div is as an invisible box around all of the stuff that's inside of it. What is OL? Someone else. What's OL? Yes?
Ordered list.
Ordered list, very good. Also called numbered list. And what's P? Very good. Good. So let's first see how this thing renders. There we go. So you will notice a few things, hopefully. Yeah. Notice the difference between a paragraph with a break in it and two paragraphs in terms of spacing. Right? Paragraph separated, there's a extra separation between different paragraphs that does not exist if you're just performing a line break. But in general, this should not be too difficult. So, let us now include a CSS file. or, okay. Now let's go through all three. So there are three ways to insert styling rules. The first way is to do so in line inside the tag itself. This is generally discouraged. It should be used as a one-time override only for a particular page. You should not rely on style attributes in HTML tags. In fact, when I am looking through your assignments for use of proper form, I am going to be looking for overuse of these tags. In fact, pretty much any use of them at all, I'm going to start raising eyebrows. So, that being said, never do this, but this is how you do it. If I wanted to make the text of this list item blue, style equals color blue. So notice that while in most attributes that we set using computers, we use the equal sign, here we are using the colon. All right? And if we were to apply multiple attributes in one go, we separate them not with a comma, but with a semicolon. You'll also see that VS Code has a very handy autocomplete menu, which gives you basically the list of CSS properties. And I will make this the hello world of CSS colors, Alice Blue. So if we re-render the page, you will see that, well, Alice Blue isn't showing up very well on this projection. Do you want, maybe I should pick a different one? That's not quite visible, is it?
About as visible as it is on the actual computer.
Yeah. I'm just kind of thinking of the recording. Maybe that'll, okay, I'll choose a different one. How about Peach Puff? A little more visible, but still does not interfere with the text. So, when you are in the realm of CSS, you are trying to make things look pretty. If, like, for our in-class examples, I am not expecting things to look that pretty. So this is kind of a do as I say, not as I do type situation. When you have time on your own, working on your assignments to refine your CSS, I expect it to look not completely terrible. There are some general guidelines. Number one, your text should be legible. Do not choose very similar colors for your text. Alright? So for example, do not do something like this. Right? That text is quite difficult to read. The thing that makes text easy to read is high contrast, which means that you want to contrast something that is highly saturated with something that is not saturated, or something with a very dark tone versus with something with a light tone. The more that you do this, this is also an accessibility thing. The closer your two fonts, or the closer your two colors are in terms of tone and hue, the harder it is for people with visual impairments to read your website. So please, be courteous, And obviously the absolute worst case of this of all time is choosing the exact same color for both, which obviously just blanks out your text, which, especially don't do that. Okay? General design principle number one, everything should be visible. Yeah? Any questions? Okay. So, as I said, when we apply a style attribute in this manner, we are basically performing a manual override on our CSS rules. CSS rules can be declared in block form at the top of the document inside of a style block. So, up here, style. When declared in a style block, CSS attributes apply to the entire document, so long as the CSS selector applies to that element. So, for example, if I wanted to apply a style to all list items, let's say I wanted to make it, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to continue to use color. Color is green, background color, let's do it, yeah, green, background color will be corn silk. There we go. So there you have it. This CSS has applied to all of our list items except for the one that contains the local declaration. This one is overriding that one. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. Any questions? Okay. So, once we have collected up all of our style rules at the top of the document, two things occur to us. Number one, that list can get quite long and can occupy a significant amount of screen space inside of the document, a document which, I may remind us, is supposed to be HTML. But once we've collected it all up in one place, it's very easy for us to move it to an external file. Right? So, if we create a new file, call it CSS example1.css, there we go. And incidentally, it's very common to use a name for a CSS file like styles, right? With the assignments that you're going to do, you're going to be making probably at most one CSS file for each of your projects. So you don't really have to worry too awful much about coming up with a bunch of different fancy file names. But anyway, so we can take our rule. There you go. Throw it in there. But it doesn't get loaded automatically. We now need to link this HTML file to our created CSS file. This is that declaration. We use the link element. Rel stands for relationship. I guess it means, relationship to this file. But really you can just think of it as like a type selector. There are lots of different valid options for this. But, this is kind of like the mechanism by which web pages load like miscellaneous stuff, But if we say style sheet, then we know we are loading a CSS file. Furthermore, oh, my tooltips. Get out of here, tooltips. Furthermore, we need to specify the actual file that contains the CSS definitions. In the same way that if we load an image, we don't actually get that image in the website unless we specify the file name. We also have to specify the file name here. href is equal to, and then whatever name you gave your CSS file. In my case, CSS example1.css. There we go. Zoom tight. And let's go in here and write another rule quickly. Div border 2 pixels solid black. If we reload the page, there you have it. You can see that our divs now have a black outline, and you can actually see where the divs are in the website. A thing that I often suggest to students when they're trying to figure out how their divs lay on the page is to use the following. The layout can sometimes be tricky, knowing where all your divs start and stop, how that actually looks on the page. It's okay to have temporary CSS rules that you enable for a period of time while you're adjusting what sections things are in. And then, before you deploy the final version, delete that rule, all those lines go away, and things look nice, right? It's a little bit like, you know, if you're like drawing something by hand and you're like laying out temporary lines and you draw over them, right? Like in a blue pencil or something, you like go into the computer and take all the blue out, something like that. It's kind of the same idea here. You can use this, you can use borders around your divs to sort of lay things out. Any questions? Everything makes sense so far? Is it just Monday? Or is this just boring? This is difficult?
Well, it's just a little.
Well, how about we take a minute or two at this point in time, and if anybody's having any difficulty getting this replicated, I'll come around and see if I can figure out what you're doing wrong. Okay? Yes, okay. Or go back. You have a spelling mistake. Dordar. I want E here, and here you want a colon instead of a semicolon. Yeah. Now that is a 1 instead of an L. Yeah, it's should be an L. Yeah, L-I for this item. Lowercase. Yeah. Now see if that works. Good. Got it. Very good. Still working on it. Looks like we're going to cancel that from the file. May I see for a moment? You're not actually specifying the file name. So href. Ref equals braces, yes, or quotes, actually, just press enter.
Thank you.
No trouble. Well, first of all, the file names got to see. There you go. Well, it needs the, wait. There you go. Give .css file extension first one. And then .css here. I'm not sure if that is actually necessary. Oh, that semicolon is misplaced. There you go. Everything good? Yes.
So, how would we like to use those ones instead of like the usual that we use, which is this one, right? Another one, this one. I'll use that one here.
Oh, very good question, actually. So, because this is not HTML,
Oh,
right? So, when you use the angle braces,
yes, I do.
yeah, that's starting a tag in HTML.
Oh, HTML.
This is not HTML, so we are referring to the tag by name, which means basically, like, they could have designed CSS where like you had to include that, but it's extra typing. Yeah.
We can use it, but we don't have to.
No, it'll be a syntactically error.
Oh, it's
It'll be a syntax error if you use it. Also, CSS selectors do more than just this. All right. Okay. So, so let me show you one thing quickly. CSS selectors can have different different effects. You can, like, they can be a lot more complicated than just giving the element name that you're targeting, right? For example, if I wanted to target all list items and paragraphs, I could say list item, comma, paragraph, and then you can see that the styling applies to, well, both of those groups. Make sense? So you can chain things together using comma. Now, let's go back into our HTML, assign some ID and class attributes, and see how things shape up. So, I am going to apply ID ending div to this div. I'm going to apply the classes, class, let's say highlight, and I'm going to sprinkle that in a couple of places. And maybe I'll give an IP up here. First point. There we go. Now, when you are working with both HTML and CSS together, I highly recommend putting them in side-by-side mode. Split left and right. This way, and if you include word wrap, there we go. So now you don't have to guess what the ID that you just typed in, 15 seconds ago is, because it's right there on screen. 15 seconds is long enough to forget a name. So, highly recommend side-by-side mode. So now, let me show you what happens when we put some overrides, or when we add some additional rules that are going to override our initial rule. Okay, so let's say I want to make this div have a different border style. For example, ending div. Remembering, what does the $sign do? What does it target?
Classes.
Not classes, the other one. IDs, that's right. So it's dot, that is for class. Let's say we want border dash radius gives you 10 pixels. Going back to my web page. You see what border radius does? Now, here is another principle of design, all right? People are generally attracted to round figures as opposed to sharp figures, right? When you're designing a cartoon character, for example, you will typically avoid the use of sharp corners. So, for example, if we take a look at characters from the television show SpongeBob SquarePants, generally this show did very well, and probably no small part of that is that the cast of characters is interesting, and people like the characters in the show, right? So if you consider, for example, Mr. SpongeBob himself, despite the fact that he is a square, right, he's only got a few sharp angles right along the bottom, and those almost for comedic effect, right? If you consider most other characters in the show, for example, Mr. Krabs, he's got hardly any sharp corners at all. A couple around the belt and maybe in the collar of the neck, but certainly the silhouette of the character is, broadly speaking, curved rather than sharp. So this is a generally true thing about interface, the design of interfaces as well. Don't underestimate how much friendlier your user interface will look if all you've done is round the corners, and it, like not even by that much, right? Even a border radius of 2 pixels will make, well, 2 pixels. Yeah, I would stand on that. Even a border radius of 2 pixels just slightly takes the edge off the pointiness of the corners and makes the interface a little bit more attractive to use. Now, you know, there's a kind of a general trend in, like, I think this is kind of, this peaked a few years ago and now it's like going down the other side again. But people used to like do like really large rounded corners so that basically everything was ellipses, right? A bit like that. Like, not necessarily bad design, but you start losing a lot of space on the page. Cutouts like this start happening at a certain like radius size, so you know, it's still useful to have rectangles. You know, you don't want to wait. Like basically, you're balancing friendliness of interface versus like how much space on the page am I wasting for, you know, curved corners and that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Does everybody agree? Yeah. So, like, if I were to apply this border radius rule to the other two, like the website all instantaneously looks much nicer, right? Despite the fact that we've done almost nothing else. So, and we can, sorry, it's right in my face. So, border radius 10 pixels, or perhaps even 5 pixels. There we go. Suddenly this looks like this is just a lot nicer to look at, right? So, good. Further, one of these divs has been singled out for special treatment. That is the purpose of the ID. The others we have the general rule applying. So, even, like you might be thinking, oh, it's overriding positionally, right? The general rule for all divs is higher up in the file, so it's applied first. So this thing overwrites it. But this is actually, this gets into another very interesting topic. This is not the case. In fact, what is going on, you can see it does, even if I reverse the positions of the rules, the website's not affected. So, one of the things that the browser is doing in the background is it is calculating, basically, each selector has a rating for how powerful it is. Powerful or specific. And if you apply multiple rules to the same element, as is happening here, the harder, more specific rules will override the more general rules. And this is done on a property by property basis. So in this example, you can see that our first CSS rule, or shall we say the general CSS rule, is applying this 1 pixel dotted border and a border radius of 5, like that. Our rule as applied only to that ID, all it's doing is setting the border radius different. It's not changing the dotted border, the dotted black border, right? So when a CSS rule overrides another one, it does so on a property by property basis, right? This is actually where the term cascading comes in cascading style sheets. Its ability to do this. So the idea is that we can layer rules on top of each other in order to produce more interesting effects. Does this make sense? So far so good? Sometimes it just takes some playing with. So let's now attack the problem of classes. So I've got a class called highlight. I write a rule for that class by using period highlight. Right? Period starts a class. Highlight, we will set border radius, or not border radius, what am I talking about? Background color. Background color to something that looks like it was highlighted with a highlighter. Chartreuse, sure. There we go. There we go. So you can see, actually I'm going to modify this. I'm going to put this from the paragraph. I'm going to move this from the paragraph to the div so you can see what it looks like for a div to have a background color. There we go. So you can see that everywhere we have applied the class in the HTML file, our highlight rule has applied the style rule, overriding some other rules but not others, right? In particular, if I were to apply this class to list item number 2, which has the style, the inline style element, if I were to also say class equals highlight, let's see the effect. Reloading it, you can see that despite the fact we have included it in the class, we still have our blue peach puff color arrangement on list item number 2. The reason for this is that inline style attributes override pretty much everything. Rare cases where they don't, but in general, if you specify it at the level of an inline style block, that overrides everything else, right? Does this make sense? So shall we discuss then what's going on here? So we have our div, right? Our div's color has been modified to chartreuse. You can note that by noting that where we have the rounded edges of the div, obviously this background color is applied to the div itself. right? Rather than anything outside or behind or in front of it. However, the text itself has a different rule applied. Now, if I temporarily disable this rule, and by the way, comment characters as seen in C# work on CSS to be able to, enable or disable regions, right? If I temporarily disable that rule, you can see the entire div is now colored with that color. But so this is what's happening, right? Looking at the way that the web page is structured, the paragraph is a sub-element of the div, right? The div has the styling rule color chartreuse applied, and as a consequence of that, that is also applied all the way on down any sub-elements. So in a sense, the paragraph is inheriting style properties from the div. And you might be saying, oh, well, I'm not sure I would go that far. It could be that this is text with a clear background, right? Clear background, the div has a background color that, we can't tell the difference from this diagram. So let me show you, dear and loyal viewers. If I set color to purple, which is going to be a very ugly color scheme. Again, do as I say, not as I do. You can see that text has turned purple. If we interrogate the HTML again, this is the paragraph which turned purple. We are not applying any styling rules to it, neither here nor there. However, the text has still turned purple, right? We applied the purple color to the div, and all child objects, in this case paragraph, have picked up that property. Does that make sense? So when you apply a style rule to an element, that rule pushes its way down, all the way down, through all nested elements. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So, it's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So now, I'd like to change tactic very slightly. Let's talk about some of the layout features of CSS. Particularly, let's talk about the box model. All right? So, the box model it determines spacing around page elements, mostly we're talking about divs. So, if I look at a div in my inspector, like this one, you will see that we have this funny, like, kind of Target-esque looking thing over here. That is called the box model. So, there are three elements of the box model: margin, padding, and the border itself. So if, for example, I go into my CSS rules, there we go. Let's see. Let's say margin will be 50 pixels. Oh, sorry, missing a semicolon. There we go. You will see that our divs now have a 50 pixel margin on each side. Make sense? We can also affect only specific margins. We can, for example, modify top and bottom margins or left and right margins. So, for example, if I wanted to set my highlighted, set my ending div apart from the other two, I can say margin, top, give it 20 pixels, margin, bottom, give that 20 pixels, margin, left, give that 50 pixels. I kind of want to put it in the middle now. Oh, don't betray me, VS Code. You're betraying me. Oh. VS Code betrayed me. Well, time for Notepad++ then. Notepad++ has never betrayed me. Wow, I'm only an hour in and it betrayed me. I know I called it the ending div, but I'm going to put it in the middle because that way you can kind of see the top and bottom margins and how it's behaving on the page. There we go. So let's see here. So there you have it. Our div here is set apart, almost as if it were like a quote or something, right, in an article. Make sense? So far so good? Good. Now, this business of the text area being cut off is, of course, extremely ugly. Margin is the amount of space around the object that you are setting aside. Padding is the amount of space inside of the object that you are setting aside. So it's a bit like an interior margin. In fact, I am comfortable saying it is an interior margin. So if we say of the ending div, padding, give that maybe 10 pixels, see how that looks. Even at only 10 pixels, all of our words are now inside of our div. Everything looks much better. Make sense? Any questions? And of course, the other element of the box model is the border. That also contributes to the size of the box. Make sense? You'll notice that when we did that, this distance and this distance remained constant. But the thing grew slightly in this direction and that direction. So the border, like in the box model, the border is not like, I know it seems like an academic point, but in the box model, you have your padding area, you have your border region, and then you also have your margin region. Right? So the width of the border pushes the margin and the padding out, right? This is different from how some other programs will handle a border, which is they will just draw like one line, or here. Other programs will sort of in between two regions, designate one line, and then draw a border of whatever width over top of it, right? So, technically speaking, you know, M, in this case you would have P, M, and then B. You have overlap between these two, right? Does that make sense? So this is the model we're going with. This is box model, and I'm pretty sure this is the version that they use in like Word documents. Any questions? Shall we take a moment to see if you guys can reproduce this CSS? I will take a moment to see if you guys need any assistance debugging. Sound good? Oh, that's a pretty thick border. Yeah. Is it working? hadn't saved it.
I wasn't saving.
Yeah, you hadn't saved it.
Seems strange, I did save it a couple of times. Like that.
If you get a little circle here or here, it means they're unsaved changes. You're welcome. Happy to be of assistance. Working, working, working. Good, good. Right there. Set 1 pixel to something like nope, on the line above. Yep, right there. Yes. You have this rule repeated though. Yeah, you should only need a box. Save it. There you go. The border is bigger. Oh.
I was going
What?
Well, you're an expert then.
It happens.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Good.
Good. Do you guys mind if I run to the washroom quickly? Alright. I'll hold it if you really want me to. There we go. All right. So, let's now talk about responsive design. So, let me ask all of you a question. I may have even asked you this question before. I can't keep track. I'm teaching similar topics in like the college diploma stream at the moment as well, so can't quite keep track of what I said to who. But did we talk about mobile phones? Yeah. How most of the people who view your website will do so through a mobile phone these days. Yeah. So this is true. Most people will look at your website through a mobile phone. But if that weren't enough, right? People will also be looking at your website through tablets. Tablets, computers, mobile phones, many different sizes of mobile phone, maybe many different resolutions. The issue that you start to run into, it's like, okay, sure, I want to design this web page for, I want to design it for phones and I want to design it for desktop, right? It's like, okay, well, how many different resolutions are you going to design your website for, right? Because, there's probably at least 5 or 6 individual ones that you'll want to address. And that, are you seriously wanting to stay on top of the exact screen resolutions of each new phone that's released to make sure that your website works on that phone? It sounds not only like like a lot of time and expense, but it just sounds boring, doesn't it? So responsive design is the idea that we design the website once for all resolutions. We design the web page so that it itself responds to the device that it is placed on, or the device that is rendering it, or even the size of the viewport, right? Responsive design means the website responds according to the width of the screen, rather than you writing a different version for each different screen width. Make sense? So, let's consider the following website, and let's see if it's a good or a bad example of a website that you would want to view on your cellular telephone. Take a look at this thing. So, good or bad? Horrible. So this is, you know, like in general, this is a very like kind of standard thing you would see for a company's website, right? You've got your nav bar at the top, bringing you to all of your different places, logo, some kind of login, contact information possibly, bunch of different areas of the website listed. This is an example, right? You can see that it even contains lorem ipsum text. By the way, you guys know what lorem ipsum is? It's a fixed piece of Latin text that has been used to test typesetting, basically back to the invention of the printing press. So lorem ipsum has been used for 500 years to see how just text. It's like your default filler text going back that far, basically. So yeah. So how might this be improved? What could we do? Yes. You mean these ones?
That'll be candidates files.
Ah, this guy? Yeah, like a little menu bar at the top.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Anybody else? Any thoughts how we could improve this thing? Yes.
Maybe the three sections at the bottom, just turn them into like drop down lists or something.
Turn them into drop down lists, yeah. So there's drop down lists and there's also collapsibles, right? Collapsible elements, right? I think they're called accordion elements. But anyway, another topic for another time. But yes, also, I would say that this contact us button down here probably doesn't belong down here at all, right? That might be like, it's literally just a repetition of this one, right? So probably this one, you just get rid of it entirely, right? Minimizing redundancy also improves the user's interface. You can see along the footer bar here, we have these same, like a repetition of this nav bar up here, down here, which if you have the sort of floating menu icon on the phone interface, you don't need to have this constantly pinned at the bottom. Also, it is not impossible to pin a nav bar at the top of a website either. So I would say that this is probably also redundant. Make sense? Good. So, several approaches to delivering mobile web content exist. One approach is to have the server detect whether the requester of the resource is a mobile or desktop and send a different web page accordingly. They use a piece of information called the user agent string to detect this. The problem with this approach is that we don't necessarily want to write an entire mobile version of a website. We would ideally send the same website to everyone and style and position it differently for different situations. Other app-based approaches involve creating native mobile applications, that is to say, iOS or Android apps instead of mobile websites. Sorry, just give me a moment. So, you probably have seen this one a fair amount, actually. There's a lot of download our app that goes on that, the app itself really is just the website, but it's in an app form instead of connecting through a browser, right? This has actually become a really, a lot of things are moving in this direction right now. Quite a large number of the sort of what you think are standalone apps are actually React.js, React Native applications. That is to say, they are websites that have been put into a special container that makes them look like a standalone app when possibly they're not, right? Creating hybrid apps that are downloaded from the device's app store but load HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into what is essentially a navigationless browser window. Apache Cordova is used to implement this type of hybrid application. So, this is more what I've described here. Enough said. But the issue with that is the users then need to download the app to their device. And, how many apps do you guys have on your devices? Probably a fair number, right? If you're, the number of apps a person has on their phone is typically quite large these days, unless they have some sort of, anti-clutter sort of personality. And then they've probably just hidden a bunch of these apps in folders, right? Yes?
I have an app for every fast food chain. It's like 20 apps.
Yeah, exactly. Fast food chains alone. Then you have Canadian Tire wants you to have an app. Pretty sure Walmart wants you to have an app. PC Optum wants, it's getting to the point where every single store that you visit wants you to be on their own app, right? That's a lot, yeah. And if I may say so, please, please, please make sure you are aware of what permissions you give the apps on your phone. There's absolutely no reason why, there's absolutely no reason why the Tim Hortons app should need to know your location, right? Now, see, it's interesting, right? Because location data is extremely interesting to advertisers, right? It's really high value data. So a lot of these apps, when people are oh, you don't need to know my location data, it's oh, well, we'll just put in a feature that needs location data that, has marginal utility. But I think the Tim Hortons app will show you what the local menu is of the Tim Hortons that's closest to you.
You can order through the app too.
Yes, you can order through the app too. But there's no reason why you couldn't like select that Tim Hortons on a map screen, right? In order to know which Tim Hortonses are closest to you, it needs to know your location. Please share your location with me. I will only use it for this purpose, I promise. Right? And that's how they get you. So yeah, of course, you know, you could also make the argument that the phone itself is also doing that. So, you know, like, I think I heard recently that Apple lost a class action lawsuit, and like every person who has an Apple product is entitled to like $20, possibly only in the United States probably, but everybody, you know, some group of people somewhere are entitled to $20 per Apple device that they own, because it is actually true that they were listening to us the whole time, right? And, you know, despite the fact that they said that they weren't, they were actually listening, right? Yeah, well, it's like, when I heard that, I was like, well, are we not still selling it a bit cheap? You know? It's like, oh yeah, this phone manufacturer committed mass violations of privacy, and like, you can only imagine what your phone has been privy to, the sorts of private conversations, you know. $20, that's what you get for that. You know? You get one meal at fast food chain. Well, in the States, maybe 2 meals at fast food chain. But, yeah. Anyway, but hey, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? Anyway. So, yes, anyway, apps. People are sometimes reluctant to download the app. That's the point I was trying to make. People are sometimes redundant. People are sometimes reluctant to download the app. So, responsive design is an approach where a website automatically adjusts to different screen sizes. This is one set of HTML and CSS rules, and there is no need for app stores. Amongst many other techniques, one core technique is to use the CSS @media rule to restyle a website according to device screen size. Other key techniques include Flexbox and the CSS grid. For example, consider the following CSS rule. @media, screen, and max width is, in this case, 600 pixels. CSS rules. We only apply the CSS rules when the screen size goes below 600 pixels. These changes to the style could be used to override existing CSS rules. So, let's, I think we need to design a new website. So, let's say thank you very much for your service, CSS example 1, but we are going to move along to CSS example 2. So in this case, let's make a photo gallery. let's go get some photos. Um, let's see here. What should this be a gallery of? Last time we did ducks. What should we do this time?
Pigeons.
Pigeons. Ooh, there we go. I'm not as familiar with pigeon species.
They're technically just doves.
Hmm. All right. There we go. Actually, I could probably just pick those. Right. Rock dove seems to be a common pigeon. Yeah, I know, right? That one sounds like a Pokemon.
If you ever get bored, you should actually look up the history of pigeons because it's kind of sad. Like, a bunch of people brought them to America for a specific purpose and then stopped using them, and now they hate them.
Yeah, like there's a whole, they're called pigeon fanciers, right? Ooh, that guy's cool. Rather intense looking look on his face, look at that. Good grief. There we go. Do I have enough? Let's see, that's 5. We'll get 3 more. There's a reason I'm getting so many. One more. Oh man, that thing looks like a little hawk. A tooth-billed pigeon. There we go. these are suspiciously small. Not all of these worked. We'll see if they load anyway. So, passenger. There we go. Well, that's a bit big. So, I think we need to make them a bit smaller. We have a lot of them though, so rather than modify each one individually, let's write some CSS rules to modify the size of these images, shall we? Let's link to CSS example 2.css. Go. And let's say image width is equal, or let's say 200 pixels. When we reload, there we go. I do have some broken images, don't I? Let's see here. Some of those things just didn't come through. Well, perhaps we'll just do a 5 and delete the ones that didn't work. we go. So, we have our photo gallery of pigeons. Because we have put everything inside of divs, everything has been stacked up top to bottom. This is probably not what we want, right? However, it is useful to have everything inside of divs because we can then do interesting things like this. Div order is 3 pixels solid gray. Order radius getcha like 15, I guess. So this looks bad, but we can make it better. Right now, we've got little corners of our images sticking up through our nice rounded corners of our divs, which of course defeats the entire purpose. So, let me show you another one, another little trick. Let's make our first one div 1, and in fact even just remove our image. Div 1, order dash image, ooh, is, what was that file called again? White crown. Dot JPEG. Okay, give me a second. CSS. Forgot the URL. So the URL function allows you to go out after remote resources. Oh. So I have figured it out. So right now, our image might be the background of the div, but if a div has no contents, it collapses itself down to nothing. So we need to set the size of the div now. width, shall we say 200 pixels, height 200 pixels. There we go. Now, our image is a little bit, skewed. We have the top right corner of this thing. But we have more properties we can rely on to get this a little more tightly constrained. And maybe it might look a little better with a bit more round on the corner. There we go. So, background position center will center the image. Background size cover will resize the background image to cover the entire container. And there you have it. Now the image is nicely chopped and rounded at the corners, right? In theory, we could also put something inside of this div, right? We could say something like, this is not cool. I don't like just close those. For example, this one is called a white crown. Right? But then we have to talk about padding and moving the text around. So, well, let's do that too. Move these properties up here so we don't have to repeat them. And padding will give you, shouldn't take more than 10 pixels, I think. Yep, that'll do. Color, white. There you go. And you can see that's already like, it still needs some work, but we have something that almost looks, something that almost looks good. We're working towards good-looking things, right? Make sense? Any questions? So applying that sort of mode of existence all the way down through, we can apply to div 2. This will be the wood pigeon. Wood pigeon, .jpg. There we go. This one is a crested pigeon. Perhaps, that'll do. ID is equal to div3. Move that over here as well. Is equal to div4. What was this one? Collared dove. you'll notice that this is actually like a fair amount of work, right? Like we're doing work right now. If we had a little bit of server-side programming, right, we would be able to easily write a loop that generates all of these things for us. All right? But as we are not yet to server-side development, we have to do repetitive things by hand. So if we reload the page, there we go. I might increase the padding just a little bit. There we go. And that doesn't look too bad, you know? Throw an image on like the background there, and you know, things aren't looking too shabby. Any questions about that? We might also, while we're at it, set a margin of at least 5 pixels. Give them a little separation. So, okay, we have our pigeons. So the question now is, how do we get responsive pigeons? Right? So, there we are. So let's use the @media screen and max width rule in order to modify our pigeons so that they are responsive to various screen widths. First, of course, we need to line them up, right? So the way that we can do this is using a flex box. So flex boxes work like this. Past a certain point, they will contract proportional to the size of the screen. But after that point, they sort of won't exceed a certain maximum width. Right? So, all we need to do is to include these in the flex container class. And then we are going to write a very special CSS rule which permits this flexibility. So, in our HTML, let's create a div that wraps all of these divs. Let's see what that looks like. Well, not so great. The div that we're using to contain the birds is itself sharing some properties with the birds, right? It's the same size, it's got the same margins and padding and all the rest of it. We don't want to apply the birds, the div rules for these individual bird images to the containing div, right? So this is an excellent time to apply a class. We include each of these in class bird image. There we go. And now, to say that this rule only applies to divs with the bird image class, we use the following selector. Div dot bird image. And there you can see that the containing div no longer has those properties. Going back to the CSS again. So classes, they look a little bit like methods or properties in an object-oriented sense, right? They're even called classes, but is it the best way to think about it, like in a strongly object-oriented sense? Possibly not, right? It's better to think of it as a group, right? I am grouping elements with this name, and it just so happens the syntax looks like object-oriented syntax. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, the time is currently 2 p.m. I think that you folks have done very well for the first half. Let's have our break, designated 30-minute break. We said 30 minutes for the breaks, right? Seems a bit long, but 15 plus 15 is 30. So, and for 3, okay, this is how I justify it, all right? Ordinarily, you would get like 10 minutes off per hour for travel time, right? We collect that all up for the 3 hours except the last hour that you guys get actual travel time. That's 30 minutes, so 30-minute break. Here we go. Sound good? You guys can go get some food if you haven't already. Okie dokie, artichoke. So we were talking about pigeons. I was about to show you how to use, I'm going to show you 2 things actually, CSS Flexbox and CSS Grid, both of which are very useful. Then we are going to use, a bit later on, we're going to use the front-end framework Bootstrap to make that slightly easier. So, so to set up a Flexbox, we need to tag our div that is containing all of our images with a special class. Well, it's not a special class until we define its properties. But let's give this a class called container. you go. In our CSS rules, and we're not actually using image anymore, container will have but one rule, and that is, display. Display flex. So a lot of the properties that we've been playing with so far have been fairly like standard, modify the width, modify the height. There are other CSS rules that do a lot more work than that, than just modifying like one visual property of something. So, flexbox. First, we notice that all of our divs are now lined up horizontally. Very good. You'll notice as well that we are still left justified. But let's see what happens when we pull our inspector and reduce the size of the viewport. Ooh, now that actually doesn't look too bad, right? Pretty good.
Other pigeons we did.
Well, see, it's looking decent because it's also like keeping the centered rule, right? Like if we'd have configured that manually in HTML, we would never, like this would be a lot of work, right? But like our pigeons kind of look decent even at about yay, right? Like obviously you want to try to keep their faces on visible, but and you know it also works because the photos are good. But yeah, so flexbox. So there are a couple of different things we can do to our flexbox just to make it a little bit, you know, a couple of options that we can explore. First of all, flex direction, all right, and justify content are some interesting ones. So flex direction allows us to also produce a flex column rather than just a flex. Like we can flex and accordion in the vertical space as well as in the horizontal space. The one I'm kind of more interested in though, flex row reverse gives us the other way. Where's just a moment? Here we go. Flex wrap is an interesting one. Flex wrap is wrap. Now, watch what happens. Doop. 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 Right? So, and you know, just for effect, I will increase the number of divs here. Right? That is good. That is a good thing. So, for example, if we had a system where we had three, going back to our slide example, right? If we had a web page with, you know, region 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom, underneath our banner, like right now, this flex box is like the entire page, but you can also do these as sub-elements of pages, right? So you can designate this whole thing as a flex box and set it to wrap, and then at screen resolutions that are sufficiently narrow, these things will automatically stack on each other, which is exactly what you want on phones, right? Because the one thing that you almost never want on a phone is stuff to appear side by side. But let's turn wrapping off for a moment and go back to Flexbox regular. You can see that these things only have a certain, amount they can go before they stop flexing. Yes?
I had a question, are the smartwatches included as well as well?
Are the smartwatches?
Smartwatches,
Oh. Do they have browsers, smartwatches?
I'm not sure that
I don't think I can get into a browser online.
I don't think there's any reason you couldn't.
Like fast Siri stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing has to be tethered to a phone though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's Bluetooth to the phone, so if you're too far away from your phone, you don't have access to the internet.
That was the case for like on some operators, but then big phones just have the one.
Yeah, I think they do that, which is.
Well, I don't know, what's like the pixel resolution of it? It might be higher than you think. Apple Watch, what's the latest version? Series 10? Ha! Screen resolution is about 370 by 445 pixels, which is actually a fair amount. I mean, the Game Boy had 64 by 64, right? So, here, let me show you another trick. Our browser is the thing that we use to debug our websites, right? In general, when we are developing websites, we are doing so on a regular computer. Something with a keyboard, right? Because, oh man, very brief tangent. Lately, I found this stupid phone game, which is called Stone Story RPG. It's entirely in ASCII art, which is what initially attracted me to it. But it allows you to do like actual, they have like a pseudo programming language that you can like program the character to perform actions on conditions and stuff, which, is kind of interesting. But good God almighty, is it awful trying to program on a soft keyboard. It's like the worst thing in the world. Don't just use a keyboard. Trust me, just use a keyboard. But this thing has a phone emulation mode. If you take a look in your inspector at the top there, you have a little button. And please pay attention because this is very important. There's a little button here that allows you to select your device, right? And if you wanted to, you could even enter the dimensions. So you see the Apple Watch has actually got a higher width resolution than the Galaxy S8. That's an actual true fact. It's 374. Oh no. 374 by, what was it? 446. So there you go. There's your Apple Watch screen. What? Who said that? All right. So let me just get rid of some of these pigeons. It's gotta be somebody outside, right?
Just the baby.
Oh, is that the baby? Oh, I thought that was somebody saying, "Oi!" Sorry. Alright. She's been so quiet, I forgot you had her.
She's working on a movement right now.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah. Alright. So, we reset. There we go. You can see that, like, this is how this website would look on an Apple Watch, right? Now, I'm not sure I recommend targeting Apple Watches as your primary development platform. Like, think small, but don't think too small, you know? But this allows you to check, you know, for example, iPhone SE screen size, iPad Pro, that's what it looks like, right? In width mode, in height mode, right? And this just allows you to very quickly check your check how things are rendering on smaller device sizes, which is very handy. Make sense? Question?
I realize there's no like Chinese devices, no Xiaomi, nothing.
Oh, well,
That's targeted.
I mean, you'd have to take that up with Chrome. Oh, wait.
Okay.
So there's a lot more than it has listed. What was the one you were looking for?
The X something.
The X. Yeah, no, still. You can always add custom devices. But how about the BlackBerry Z30?
Use these?
You want to know something? My father-in-law uses a BlackBerry that is like 10 years old, and like the carrier has like threatened to just drop it because it's not supported anymore, and he's like argued with them and like extended it and stuff, and like my goodness. I think he still has it. I think he's still using it. It's like one of those BlackBerries with the keyboards.
Oh.
So it is possible. So so let's just take a look at what adding FlexWrap does there. Nothing, actually. So probably because we're already, so flex boxes. That's one approach. Okay? So let's now examine the CSS grid. The way that you set up the CSS grid is very similar to how you set up the Flexbox. You take all of the things you want to be in the grid, you make them sub-divs of one div that you give the container class, but instead of saying display flex, we say display grid. So let's take a look at that, and let's set this back to regular mode. There you go. turning off phone mode right there. There we go. Let's set display to grid. There we go. So this initially seems to put us right back where we started, but that's just because we haven't enabled enough options yet. So yeah. So let's try inline grid. There we go. So So in order for the grid to do anything, we need a grid template. Our first property here is the height of the row that we are producing. We then, if we want 3 columns, we say auto 3 times. If you want 5 columns, you say auto 5 times. Let's throw in a grid template. In our case, let's make the height about 300 pixels. There we go. There we go. Sorry.
Is 150 pixels the top of the grid instead of all the pixels, like it should be just 50 pixels? Perhaps?
It's the row height. So here, let me show you. So right now, you'll notice that like I have some gap here, right, that I didn't have before. You'll notice that the height of the divs themselves is constrained to 200 pixels. Let me make this less than that, maybe 100 pixels. And you can see that rather than, because I've overridden the height parameter, it overlaps the divs instead of like modifying the div size. But let's see what happens when we turn off that override. Let's see what happens if we let it decide its own height. There we go. Now this one's a little short, isn't it?
Can we use a percentage? Would that also work?
Should be, yeah.
Uh,
20% isn't very wide. Let's say 50%. That looks like about what it's doing. But anyway, you can see how this might be a way to implement a nav bar, like just like that, right? Even sort of aside from the fact that we're now, our pigeons are now, slightly constrained.
So you could read the text, like we did in the first class,
Mm-hmm.
link it to another HTML page.
Oh, yeah, you can make those into links very easily. All you have to do, go into the HTML, because this is HTML now, right? And a href and grab that link, save. There we go. I mean, it screws up the color scheme now because, like, we have to set the color scheme differently, but there you go. Yep. Remember that this is HTML and everything is nested, right? You can nest anything in anything. So, pardon me. So,
So I have a question.
yeah.
Inside the paragraph itself, can we use like specific words inside the paragraph and link it to a site?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Let's see what we get here. Canadian Pigeon Fanciers Association. Oh. There we go. That is quite the pigeon, I must say. The CPFA, that's right. So if I wanted to say in the website something to the effect of paragraph, pigeon fancying is a hobby going back centuries that is still active in the present day. And if I wanted to take present day, make it a link to the Pigeon Fancier website. There we go. And there we go. Good question, thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Is it okay if your code doesn't work? You mean, would you like to take a moment and have me debug something for you?
No, it's okay.
No, we've done quite a bit. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at your code. How do I get it? Like, there we go. Alright. Let me see what you got. Oh, well, I mean, if you don't have any pictures, then you need to put in pictures.
Yeah, but I was also never this kind of save something JPEGs.
May I see? Where did you save them? Some of these are HTML documents, which means they're not pigeons at all. this only applies to divs with this class. Oh. Try it again. Okay, this is the container. This is class first. There we go. Try that. Still nothing. Oh. Right? Nothing was being applied. Now we have something basic. It's not, it's still not loading the image, but that might now be like. So the 18 kilobytes does not seem like good enough, but it's there. Anyway, that's progress. How are you doing? Yeah, you right click, open with, choose another app, more apps, should be photo viewer. There you go. Oh, and another thing, you should enable file extensions. That way, because you need the file extension to be able to. No problem. Pretty good. How's it going with you?
The lecture, I said it opens wrong cancels the lecture. In my head I thought it was gonna be 1 hour, but it's 2 hours.
I feel like if he was gonna cancel it, he would have already canceled it.
But last time he was
Also,
supposed to stay for
say-
1 hour.
I know, I see it in the class and he's like, you just have a little kid? I'm like, yeah, I gotta go with my kid.
Bad? Oh, yeah, but, display is flex and, flex boxes are different. You don't use a template. This would be display with, and then templates. Oh, and always semicolon, always semicolon. Forward slash, auto. So, I don't know, that's closer. Okay. So, I'm not going to hammer responsive design too hard here because really the way that people do this in the modern internet is using libraries like Bootstrap. The Bootstrap container system integrates the functionality of flexboxes and the grid system together in a way that's non-trivial, shall we say, if you were to do that in CSS alone. It's actually impossible to use both flexbox and grid at the same time, as they are both different values of the one display property. So you can only set, there can only be one applied value of display. That's either grid or flexbox or something else. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's see what the rest of the slides have to say about responsive design, shall we? Let's try some. We didn't actually use @media. So let's make it so that our images of pigeons are flex at wide screen widths, but then okay. Now okay, I got my idea. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take these things so that at wide screen widths, we will display them using flex. And then at narrow screen widths, we will have wrap as well as flex to avoid the problem of having them go too narrow. All right? So, in order to do this, we need the media tag, this guy here. So, this is a special CSS rule. This is a CS rule that you pack other CSS rules into. It functions a bit like an if statement, right? So if the media screen is at a max width of 600, we apply this rule, otherwise we don't. All right? If it exceeds that, we apply the regular one. So let's change this back to flex and flex wrap is wrap. And in here, container will be display still flex, or no, I'm sorry, I wanted wrap, that's small. Display will be flex, and flex wrap will be wrap. All right, so this guy will override the other one. Let's see how this works. There we go. So you can see that we are in regular flex mode. However, as we go narrower, 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 we're approaching 600. Bonk! Ah, see? Bonk, 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 bonk. Basically just apply like a centering here, and like that's pretty easy as well. If you apply to the container margin auto, that I believe will fix that, or perhaps not. Anyway, so this here is called a breakpoint, right? So breakpoints are, well, they're the points at which we transfer from one layout or view to another layout or view, right? So you can see that if we pushed these containers much smaller than this, they sort of begin to cease to function correctly, right? They would be too narrow, you know, the word, well, this words still have a little bit to go, but you know, at a certain point the words themselves are gonna like start exceeding the bounds of the divs, the images will be too small to really do anything with, right? But boop, when we pop down here, and you know, like obviously you'd fix these so that it was like centered on the bird's face or something. But that has once again restored the size of the items, right? Which gives us something to poke, right? The thing that you have to keep in mind about touch interfaces is that, like, making people click on links in text is a little bit bad design. Like, it's better than it used to be as phone sensitivity and resolution has been improving over the years. But in general, right, I know that you are all young people, right? And you all have, you have hands which are young and supple. But you must keep in mind that, like, the phone app should be usable by people with like great big meat mitts, you know? Like, I know this is like kind of a strange thing to say, but like, people's fingers can be quite large, you know, and the larger a person's fingers are, the less precise they are on a touch screen. So, and not to mention for, you know, people with poor vision or the elderly, increasing the amount of on-screen space that you can, like, increasing the size of the clickable thing makes the interface easier to use for the very young, the very old, and the people who have very large fingers. So that's like another design principle when you're designing for mobile is like, make the links decently sized, right? Does that make sense? Like, for example, one of the things that we did here is that we made this, the text here a link, right? I would actually say that that's bad design, right? What we should actually do there is we should make it so that if they click on the div, anywhere on the div, that registers as the click, rather than specifically on the text, right? That alone would drastically improve user friendliness. Does that make sense? Very good. So, and I know how to do that in JavaScript, but I don't know how to do that in vanilla HTML, but, you know, I'm sure there's a way. So, any questions about that? So that is the concept of a breakpoint. And what libraries like Bootstrap do for you is they can implement a fairly large number of pre-configured breakpoints that you can also further configure. So you don't have to do this all manually. Make sense? Good. So, let's consider the following. Conversion, let's consider the following responsive website. So, first of all, please note that the overall layout here is not significantly different from the layout here, although the divs have been, like, they're a bit more explicit where the divs are, right? Because they've got the white boxes, right? So, but fundamentally, like, you've got a few full width divs, you've got a few 3 side-by-side, 3 column divs. When this is converted to the mobile version, you'll notice, well, first and most obvious thing to notice is exactly this collapsing of everything into one column, right? We take our side-by-side elements and line them up linearly, right? Obviously, if you were to take a width like this and divide it into 3 columns, you know, like this, you have barely enough room to do anything, right? In general, a line of text, you should be able to fit more than 3 words on it. And if your line of text is so short that there are like standard, like common English words that would exceed the width of the length of one line, you probably don't have enough width, right? So these things stack. Very good. Number 2, nav links are no longer horizontal, right? You notice that we have all of these navigation links at the top of the screen. These have been flex wrapped so that they all appear, you know, they're not all crunched across in one horizontal thing. There are a bunch of them. There are several rows now. As you pointed out previously, possibly a better thing to do with that even than this would be to make a little menu icon and have that as a drop-down pull-out thing, right? Another one is big logos have been removed. So unless the picture is like very important, often it's just occupying space, right? This image here is really just occupying space, right? This extremely large heading here is really just occupying space. You can see that like this large heading as well has been removed. This paragraph has been copied here, but this heading is just, it's gone, right? What?
So then who decides what to be removed and not?
Well, this is the role of the designer, right?
Us?
You, yeah. This is front-end development. Front-end development is making things look pretty, right? Now, it requires a sense of the aesthetic, right? There are certainly like analytical rules that there are rules that you can follow, but no single rule is going to be like set in stone. There's no one approach to this, right? There are some generally good guidelines, like for example, don't put yellow font on white background, right? But how you take something like this and design it so that it can flop between mobile and desktop versions, that's like there's a lot of design work that goes into that, right? Some people are going to be better at this than others. Some people specialize in this, right? Like the world of web is quite large, right? There's enough room inside of people who, you know, do the internet for a living. There's enough room inside there for lots and lots of specialized subdisciplines. One of them is this, right? Website layout and how to configure it for responsive design, right? And if this is one of your interests, right, then like you stay up to date on latest trends, right? You read blogs about this like design and, you you keep up to date with what the new hotness is in CSS, like layout things that they've added. It's like, ooh, Bootstrap 6 came out. I wonder what they've changed. Are there any new features they've added? That type of thing. To put to make a long story not much shorter. Industry has trends. Industry develops in a certain direction. You stay on top of industry trends. Otherwise, your websites start to look dated, right? You have to you have to stay current, right? But that's not to say that this type of layout and design it's not necessary for everybody who touches the internet to stay current with this type of stuff. You should know that this is how websites are put together now, right? But it's absolutely fine to be a back-end specialist, for example, and really only be concerned with databases and the server and stuff. And that's where people who are generally good programmers but completely unartistic, that's where you would find yourself as you'd be in a back-end role. Now, in the case of your sort of futures inside of the medical field, what you folks are training for, what you are being trained for is a kind of a generalist role, right? You folks may not be working with large teams, right? May or may not. In general, what's going to be expected of you folks, probably, if you end up doing web design stuff for whatever hospital or medical organization you end up working for, you'll probably be in the role of a quote-unquote full stack developer, right? So the full stack developer combines the roles of front-end development and back-end development, right? But even among front-end developers, there's not the CSS person is not the only front-end person, right? As we're going to see, JavaScript is a pretty big deal, right? And it's quite different from CSS. It's like programming in the proper sense. Programming much more akin to the C# programming we did last semester, right? So, there are HTML and CSS people out there who just would completely fall apart if they were required to do any proper programming in JavaScript, right? They tend to be more artistically minded people, right? Programming is a difficult thing to learn to do, right? JavaScript is a particularly difficult programming language as well. Yeah.
I thought it was creating dynamic websites as well.
Well, yes, yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of the overall purpose of JavaScript, right? But the question is that there are a couple of questions that begs, right?
Yeah.
One, what do you mean by dynamic, right? Because and two, well, actually that's the one question that your comment begs. What do you mean by dynamic, right? There are many different forms of dynamism, right? The most basic level, the one that we'll be doing in JavaScript first, is stuff like I click a button and something does something, right? It's I make a button on my web page, I click that, and this text turns green. That's going to be one of our first examples, right? A little bit further up than that, do you still have cookie clicker running? Yeah. Oh, this is a little bit of a step up from that, right? This does not actually require communication with the server.
This requires code, right?
But yeah, it certainly requires code. Yeah. JavaScript. In fact, the thing that I did during the break and perhaps a little bit after the break was I hacked the game because it's only JavaScript after all. And I will show you how to hack Cookie Clicker as well. This is a thing I'm going to do. I'm going to do this every time now. When we talk about set interval, I'm gonna show people how to do that with Cookie Clicker now. This is my decision. So anyway, so that's like dynamic behavior on the front end. You can implement an entire video game in it, as is demonstrated by Cookie Clicker, right? Dynamic also means like communicating with the server while the website is running, right? So think about social media, right? You're scrolling through your social media, and how long can you scroll through social media before you reach the end? Yeah, it's functionally infinite, right? So here's my question. Do you think your phone has downloaded all of that content? Right? Not all at once. So basically what's happening while you're scrolling through your feed is once you reach a certain point in it, it's like, okay, I'm gonna say, hello server, can you give me the next 40 entries, please? And the server is like, here you go. And then the phone seamlessly tacks on those additional 40 entries to the feed that you're currently doom scrolling through, right? And probably what it's also doing is like the stuff that you've already seen, it's liberating some of those resources as well, because fundamentally the phone only has so much memory as well, right? So so that's another form of a dynamic behavior in a website, is I have to go back to the server to perform some kind of database operation, and then take that information that it gives me and integrate that into the page somehow, right? So there's a lot hidden behind that word dynamic, right? But yeah, that's like CSS can't do that, HTML can't do that. It has to be JavaScript. Make sense? Very good. Any other questions? These are extremely good questions. Cool. And again, I will say that in this class, right, once again, we are done CSS this week. We will be moving on to JavaScript next week. Right? Let me show you our modules, our path through this course. At least I hope that's the case. I hope I didn't just lie to you. Yeah, next week we start JavaScript, right? So, the purpose here, I'm not expecting anybody in this room on the strength of these 5 hours this week alone to be expert CSS, website designers, even after you've completed the assignment, right? You're not fully fledged front-end developers just because you've listened to me talk for 5 hours this week, right? It requires practice, it requires knowledge, and then practice, knowledge, knowledge, practice. The more you practice, the more you know, the more you know, the more you practice, right? Front-end developer is a job. You can get paid for it, right? There you go. Not bad, right? Interestingly,
What about web developers?
back-end developers make a bit more, because they have to do a lot of security stuff that front-end people don't have to worry about. But front-end, back-end, you make about the same. And full-stack developers, as you can see, probably because they're more flexible, right? They make a bit more money than that, right? So, you know, Indeed seems to think they make close to 100K, right? But yeah, so like the purpose of this course is to give you a sort of, you should become literate in these technologies, but we're not attempting to achieve like full expertise in any of the things we're touching here, right? We simply don't have the time, right? And like, to some extent, when you folks get out into the field, you will probably do some web development, but you may not do much, right? It really depends on what kind of project you're working on, right? So, like, for example, let's say that a new product comes on the market, some kind of, you know, internet-connected thing that wasn't internet-connected before. You know, I'll probably say something that already exists, but you know, let's say that you know, an IoT blood pressure monitor comes onto the market, right? And it's sort of, it might be your position in the future to like take a look at your building's Wi-Fi and network connectivity, make sure that you can support the new thing that the managers want to buy and implement, right? Make sure that, you know, to the extent that it needs additional local resources, which it might, right, that you can put that in place, right? Like, this is why you're being taught some networking stuff as well. But again, you guys are kind of being trained to be generalists. You know what's necessary, and you can implement it with, you know, time. But like, another thing that a manager is gonna like expect you guys to know is like what the limits are and when it's really best to call in an expert on like one area or another, right? So you should also like be aware of your limitations, right? This might take the form of, you know, well, how about I whip up a prototype for you, and you know, if we get a proof of concept running on this, that, or the other, then maybe, you know, you can convince whoever it is to, you know, front some money for like the good version of the website or something, right? Something like that. But yeah, we will be moving into JavaScript next week. Let me see if there's anything more to say about responsive design. Yes. So you can test responsive design by resizing the browser window. But again, if you notice, I'll show it to you one more time. There is also the ability to hit this little button up in the corner and test this for various phone sizes. So you'll see, for example, this one, perhaps at default resolution I want like 2 per side, and you know, I can modify the appropriate property to skinny them up just a little bit so that I get them 2 by 2, 2 columns in its default resolution on that device. That's something that you can do, right? Or you could just use Bootstrap. Yep. So, often to implement a responsive design, we want to use a front-end framework of some kind. Front-end frameworks offer built-in style definitions and constructs for creating websites. So, one thing that you should try to avoid is reinventing the wheel, right? If existing solutions exist and are good, it is better to use the existing solution than to have to try to redevelop it on your company's, at your company's expense or your organization's expense. Especially if said resources are free. And you know, a lot of these frameworks are developed under open source licensing, which means that you can use them for free. You don't have to pay for them, right? So using these sorts of resources also allows us to solve these problems in a kind of standardized way, so that if you do end up working on a team, everybody kind of is on the same page about how things are supposed to work, because you have used X framework. So if you solve all of these design challenges yourself, first of all, you may come up with something innovative, right? But often you probably won't, right? Often what you're, like, I don't mean this disparagingly, but your solutions to the problem are, like, they may have interesting, unique features, but they're unlikely to be optimal, right? Whereas the solutions to these problems, which are built into frameworks, are the results of the collaboration of hundreds of developers, sometimes more, right? All talking, conspiring, deciding what the, you know, picking among themselves what the best solutions are to each of these problems. So, you know, you can rely on their work. As stated previously, Bootstrap is a popular front-end framework that replaces a lot of the CSS that we've talked about. It makes the whole thing easier. As I said, the Bootstrap container system alone is a combination of flex boxes and the CSS grid that you can throw together at one time, which is something you can't do with just vanilla CSS, right? And it looks good. When we do it, you'll see it looks good. But yeah, any questions about that? Cool. Let me just take a look at the module and see if there's anything I want to mention before we get out of here. Float and clear, huh? So, floats are kind of important. So, when you have an image that's floating, right? It means that text will wrap around it. So, if we take a look at what happens to this pineapple at a narrower screen width, you can see that the text sort of cuts out around the image, right? It's not just images, right? This is the same thing behind on Wikipedia. This call out box here is using float as well. These are using float. This is like an obvious example of float being used, right? Because you can see it, the L shape. It gets even more obvious if you're, you know, doing it here. Of course, you know, on a phone, you probably want to avoid the use of floats and just snap things to the entire width if it's necessary to do a diagram, because again, you kind of run into this problem of how narrow is too narrow for text, right? Does that make sense? Good. So, and of course you You can float left and right. So the thing about no floating, right? So if you just insert an image into text, it will inline the image. I think probably you folks are familiar with this sort of behavior because Microsoft Word does this as well. Like if you insert an image into a line of text, it will just like it'll inline it with the text. I think in Microsoft Word, the default is that the text like pops to the bottom, right? HTML, it pops to the middle, but you know, this image is considered a part of that text in the absence of the float, which can be useful. You know, if you want to like inline a logo into paragraph text or something like that, like you can find uses for this, but probably not what you want in most cases, right? Okay, good.